So I'm going to be talking about ways that we can increase the credibility of meta-analysis. Much of the science that we do within the biobehavioral sciences is under the hypothetical deductive model. But this model is short-circuited by a range of questionable research practices. Now, many of you may have seen this, this figure before, but I think it's important to reiterate that if a number of these questionable research practices can actually short-circuit these things, but a lot of the focus around this is on primary research. And of course, that's very important. But in all this discussion, quite often what's left behind is how this affects meta-analysis, which is the synthesis of various of results across various studies into what's commonly done into a summary effect size. Here is a hierarchy of evidence. We're going to return to this figure and the issues this figure has, but commonly speaking, if you were to do an undergraduate course, or if you were to look online or to Google this, this is the sort of figure that you would see when it comes to the hierarchy of evidence. At the bottom, you have case reports, opinion papers. Now, of course, all these types of research are important and they're informative, but when it comes to the credibility of evidence, this is the sort of figure that we typically see. And right at the top, we have meta-analysis and systematic reviews. So quite often when people are discussing things, particularly so even in lay forums, people often point to, well, this is a meta-analysis, as if this is the end of story. But the reality is, even a lot of governments and a lot of places, health authorities do use results from meta-analyses to make decisions. So they're at the top of this pyramid, and they're very important for decision making. Like primary research, there are hundreds of potential decisions that you can make when you are conducting a meta-analysis. So I think what's also important is this talk will be very useful for you. You don't necessarily have to be running your own meta-analysis, but in the course of your research, I'm sure you will come across a lot of meta-analyses. So I think hopefully you're going to get a lot of nice tips on how to actually assess the credibility of meta-analyses that you are looking at yourself and including in your own research. So yes, there's hundreds of potential decisions, just like there is with primary research when it comes to the sort of questions that we're asking, how broad or how specific our hypotheses are, and our analysis itself. There are many potential decisions you can make when conducting a meta-analysis. And the scope of this I only really learned when I started doing my own meta-analysis. I remember that the first ever assignment I did in undergraduate psychology, back in the first few weeks, we had to assess a meta-analysis, which I thought was an odd choice for a for a first year psychology assignment. But anyway, so I'll always remember meta-analyses, but it wasn't until I actually started conducting my own meta-analyses and realized the number of decisions that I needed to make that I thought, boy, this can potentially cause a lot of issues for running a meta-analysis. And I also kind of find it quite funny when people say, "Oh, you know, I'm just going to conduct a meta-analysis. I'll just throw one together." They're difficult and they take a lot of work. So if you're thinking of doing one, please, I encourage you to do it, but don't think that they're necessarily easy. They do take a lot of work. Okay, one common way that you can reduce the potential or make transparent the decisions that you make is the pre-registration of your meta-analysis. Pre-registration has becoming more and more popular within a lot of areas of science, but it's been done for quite a long time within medicine. For instance, clinicaltrials.gov is a very common place that a lot of people register their clinical trials. So this idea of trial registration is becoming more and more common, but it still isn't as common for meta-analysis. I do peer review a lot of meta-analyses, and quite often a lot of them don't pre-register what their analyses are going to do, which is potentially quite a large issue, considering that there are many analytical decisions or many decisions to be made when you are running your meta-analysis. Probably the most important reason to pre-register your meta-analysis is so that you can allow others to transparently evaluate the riskiness of your hypotheses. Just to give an example, say you were doing a meta-analysis looking at treatments for depression, you could do a very, very broad hypothesis saying these interventions will improve symptoms for depression. But that's extremely broad, and you could take a number of different approaches to answer that question. You can look at different measures. You can change your inclusion-exclusion criteria. That's not very risky at all. If you are very selective with your inclusion-exclusion criteria, it is very easy to come up with that conclusion, or to have the answer to your meta-analysis supporting that. That sort of prediction is not risky. However, if you are pre-registering your meta-analysis and you're specific with your hypotheses and your analyses and the decisions that you're making, that makes it a more risky, that makes your hypotheses a little bit more risky. But with pre-registration, that allows others to transparently look at the riskiness of your hypotheses. This also improves the confidence of your findings as well. One big problem with the meta-analysis is quite often there's often a financial conflict of interest. The amount of meta-analysis that you see where it's like, oh, it happened to support the therapy that you developed and you sell books and workshops for. But quite often it also, people also tend to have an intellectual conflict of interest. Most of us have that. So quite often these meta-analyses are done to summarize a body of work that you're interested in. So by pre-registering that improves the confidence that others will have when they're reading your meta-analysis. But I think it also becomes a part of your planning process as well, which is something which is often not considered. That there's a lot that goes into planning these meta-analyses, and sometimes you can't just jump in. But in the process of doing your pre-registration, it helps you think about what you're actually going to be doing there. And another practical reason is that it helps avoid duplication. There are only so many researcher hours out there in the world, so many research questions that we can ask. By having a quick look on common registries, you can actually see whether someone else is answering the same sort of question, and it can save them or it can save you a lot of time, because if they've pre-registered it, chances are they're doing it and they're going to come out with the paper sooner than you. So it's important to help avoid duplication as well. And look, I do want to stress that with pre-registration, with meta-analyses, it's okay to change your plans. It can be very hard to anticipate what you are going to find. Perhaps you're doing your analysis and you find that there's a population of studies which all happen to have massive effect sizes, which tend to be unrealistic. As long as you're transparent about the sort of changes that you made, that's okay. But this allows the reader and the reviewers to actually see where you changed your pre-registration. So if you've got a certain set of things that you want to do for your meta-analysis, you don't have to stick with what you're doing there. It's okay to change it as long as you're transparent with those changes that you made when you were writing up your analysis. There are a few different places that you can pre-register your plans. Within the health sciences, Prospero is quite a popular place to do that, which comes with a nice template for pre-registering your meta-analysis. You just go through and fill things out. You can also publish a systematic review and meta-analysis protocol. A number of journals offer this as a type of paper. A lot of the BMC family of journals do this. There's a journal called Systematic Reviews, in which you just post your you either post your systematic review results or you post your protocol. This is something that I've done. It's one way to get feedback on your protocol, but it can delay the time it takes to actually do your meta-analysis due to the peer review process. So that's one potential option. You can also do a registered report meta-analysis. Registered reports are an article type which are reviewed in two stages. During the first stage, the reviewers look at your rationale and look at your methods, and then they assess, and if they believe that this is going to answer an important research questions and the methods are sound, then with the reviewers and the editor, they recommend they may recommend a publication based on stage 2 when you actually receive the results. So as long as the results, it doesn't matter what the results are, whether they're positive or they're negative, as long as you followed through with your plans, or if you made changes and you were transparent with your changes, then they'll publish your article regardless. Much in the same way of publishing your protocol, this is great because, well, for two reasons. Firstly, you get feedback on your protocol and your analysis plans before you actually collect your data. And secondly, it also means that your paper has in principle acceptance already before you even collect your data, which is fantastic and a really good way of preventing null results. Much like primary research, there's also publication bias for meta-analysis in that all things equal, a meta-analysis which reports no significant differences is less likely to get published compared to a meta-analysis which demonstrates significant differences as well. So registered reports helps negate that. The most straightforward thing to do, which I also do occasionally, is to post your protocol to Open Science Framework. You can put together your protocol and your pre-registration, and you can post it on Open Science Framework, and there you have time-stamped evidence of your pre-registration plans for your meta-analysis. If you're short on time, for instance, if you're working with a master's student who needs to get this done as quick as possible in terms of the pre-registration process, then I'd recommend that. And on top of that, Open Science Framework has a number of pre-registration templates, much in the same way as Prospera. So you can go through and you can put all the details in there. So there are a number of places where you can pre-register what you're going to be doing for your meta-analysis. One really big issue with meta-analysis is publication bias. So you're collecting your data from primary research studies, but there's two factors. Like I said before, there's less likelihood that your studies that report non-significant results are going to get published, which can bias your summary effect sizes when you're completing your meta-analysis. And on top of that, often studies that are published have inflated effect sizes. So not only are the effects you're seeing not the whole story, but the effects that you see are often inflated. This is a really nice illustration. This is actually a plot which is commonly used within meta-analysis. It's a contour-enhanced funnel plot, or it's a variation of a contour-enhanced funnel plot, and it plots effect size against a measure of standard error. The studies that filled circles, these are published studies. So for this particular field of research, all these studies happen to fall very, very close to the traditional statistical significance line of 0.05. Once you have, as long as you have a measure of effect size and a measure of its variation, you're able to actually calculate the equivalent p-values. So here we can see these p-values, all which are very, very close to 0.05, to that threshold of statistical significance. But for this particular research field, there was a number of replication studies, and all of them fell around 0. So magically, these replication studies, you can see once you actually pre-register these studies, these effects tend to go around 0. So this is a very, very stark illustration, but I'm sure if this was done for a lot of research fields, this is precisely what you would find. So this presents a really big issue for meta-analysis, because the studies that you're getting in, if there's a huge amount of publication bias, what are you actually calculating? This is an update of that hierarchy of evidence that I presented before. So at the bottom now, we have status quo research. This is the research which is not pre-registered and the materials aren't archived, all the way up to the registered report format, which is what I mentioned before, which eliminates, or largely eliminates, the issue of publication bias. And at the top of the pyramid, we have a meta-analysis of registered reports. And to my knowledge, I think there's only been a couple of these meta-analysis of registered reports, only because there aren't a lot of registered reports out there at the moment. Fortunately, I think about 300 journals now accept registered reports, but this is growing. So there's only been a few. But when it comes to the trustworthiness of research, this would be the top of the hierarchy, because if you are collecting data from registered reports, then you can be very confident that the effect sizes haven't suffered from effect size inflation, and that all the effect sizes you're seeing are all the effect size that exists, and there's no studies which have been shuffled away into a file drawer. There are various ways that you can look at publication bias within meta-analysis, and the most common way is looking at funnel plot asymmetry. We have this figure here, and panel A, you can actually see there's a rough symmetry between both sides of that pyramid. But panel B, it's asymmetrical. But you can see the problem there is that this is relatively subjective. Perhaps, to our eyes, we would say that as asymmetrical, a panel B, but some people might go, well, I'm not sure about that. So that can pose quite a problem. There is an objective way to look at funnel plot asymmetry, and one of these ways is Egger's regression test. This is a good way because you can actually do this analysis to see whether there's any evidence of funnel plot asymmetry. But the problem with Egger's regression test is that it doesn't necessarily measure publication bias. Funnel plot asymmetry is more accurately categorized as small study bias, which can include publication bias. So by using this kind of analysis, it's not an accurate way of assessing publication bias, but this is what most people do. This is what I used to do before I knew any better. But I would wager almost every single article that any meta-analysis that I review and read will look at Egger's regression test or use some sort of test of funnel plot asymmetry and make a decision on whether there is or isn't publication bias based on this. Yet this is not a direct measure of publication bias. It is a measure of small study bias. But there are better ways to look at this and ways that we can more directly look at publication bias. Some of these, so here are some examples of some of the things that people have suggested. There's pet peeves, there's p-curve, there is the test of excess significance and replicability index. But these methods tend to assume low heterogeneity, which I think is a tough assumption to make for a lot of meta-analyses. That is, the studies that are included in a meta-analysis are quite homogeneous. But that is, I think, a tricky assumption for many areas. And in a lot of simulation studies, a lot of these methods have not tended to perform well. An emerging method, or one method that has performed well, are selection models. Now, what this does is this assumes that some p-values or studies with some p-values are more or less likely to be published. And I think that's quite a fair assumption. So what it does is it gives more weight to studies in intervals that have a lower publication probability. And even under situations of high heterogeneity, selection models tend to work well. You don't have to know how to use R to run selection models, as the more recent version of JASP, which is free and which is point and click, you can run selection models yourself. So in this particular example, we can look at the direct test of publication bias, both assuming heterogeneity and homogeneity. And this is really, really nifty. Not only does it actually detect publication bias, but it also performs an adjustment for your effect size, saying, after we've accounted for publication bias, what is the size of the effect? So in this particular example, if you're looking at the panel on the bottom right, particularly the last two, the random effects and random effects adjusted, we can see when you don't account for publication bias, in this particular example, the mean estimate is around 0.15. And it would suggest that there was a significant effect. However, once you actually adjust for the presence of publication bias, then that effect is no longer significant. For this particular analysis, if you were to run the traditional Egger's regression test, you will not have any indication of publication bias, mainly because that's looking at small study bias. But once you actually specifically start looking at publication bias, at least using selection models here, we can see once you adjust for it, well, firstly, there is the presence of publication bias. And secondly, once you adjust for it, then these effects are not as robust as we thought originally. So it's really, really nice. And I mean, I guess there could be situations as well where there would be the presence of publication bias, yet when you adjust for publication bias, the effects are still significant. So it gives you those two sets of information. Another more recent thing that we've been working on, or I've been collaborating with, is Bayesian meta-analysis, or robust Bayesian meta-analysis. This is a paper which is currently under review, but you can go through and it provides a tutorial both in JASP and in R on how to run Bayesian or robust Bayesian meta-analysis. And there's a few strengths about this approach compared to traditional weight models. Now, the issue with looking at a frequentist approach for publication bias is that if you get a non-significant test of publication bias, it's not very informative, because it might be due to an insensitive test, or it might be due to support for a null model. You don't know. No matter what the size of the p-value is, you can't make that determination. Whereas with the Bayesian approach, you can actually look at the relative evidence for the absence or the presence of publication bias. So you could say that there are 4 times more evidence for a model of publication bias compared to a model of no publication bias. You can't make those sort of you can't draw those kind of conclusions with a traditional or a frequentist approach for publication bias. One issue with weight selection models is if you have a small number in your meta-analysis, or within your meta-analysis, if there are a small amount of p-values, the models don't work. That isn't an issue. It's still possible when you have when you have smaller numbers with Bayesian or with robust Bayesian analysis. And it's very useful as well, because you can actually include a whole bunch of different models when you don't have to make any assumptions or choose a model. You can include all of them. You can retain all models. So if you're interested, I would recommend having a look and going into the paper, which goes through the rationale, but also provides step-by-step guide on how to perform this, both in JASP. Well, it's mainly focused on JASP, but there's associated script on how to do this within R as well. We even put together a video for this paper, which is really nice. So if you're the sort of type that likes learning visually, then you can load the analysis script in your own version of JASP, and you can follow along in the video as well. Okay, I just want to cover a few different things to consider when you're pre-registering your own study, or when you're reading other studies, or when you're reading other pre-registrations as well, just to see how thorough these pre-registrations are. Firstly, it's inclusion criteria. I always find it funny when I see colleagues doing a meta-analysis and they're including all types of studies, and I'm thinking no one there speaks German. You have to make sure that you actually understand the papers that you're including. And if no one can actually understand a different language, then you have to think about what sort of papers you're going to be doing. Another question is the peer-reviewed versus the so-called grey literature. I'm on the side that you should be a little bit more inclusive with the sorts of literature that you're including. And especially for some topics, if some topics, like say you were doing some sort of COVID research thing, most of the research is very rapid and posted on preprints. So if you weren't including preprints, then you're missing out on quite a lot of literature out there. So my approach typically is, yes, include the grey literature, but perhaps you want to run a moderate analysis just to see, is there a big difference between the peer-reviewed and the non-peer-reviewed literature? And perhaps you want to include some sort of criteria for the year of publication. For instance, if you're looking at a particular diagnosis, maybe you want to set a year, according to when the DSM-4 came out, for instance. There are certain justifiable ways that you can cut off where you actually want to set the publication year as well. You really should be including the search terms that you're going to use and the databases as well. Different databases have different strengths. I'd really recommend working with your local academic librarian. They are experts at putting together these search terms. This is actually recommended as well when it comes to doing a really gold standard meta-analysis, is to work with your local academic librarian to put together these search terms, just to make sure that you're getting the appropriate hits when you're running your search as well. Look, and there's other considerations, which is more, I'm not really getting into the actual analysis and meta-analysis within this talk, but you can look at whether you're interested in fixed or random effects as well, the type of heterogeneity estimator, and these are all things which could potentially affect your outcomes as well. So you want to specify this ahead of time, and how you're going to be assessing publication bias as well. Okay. If you wanted to go down the route of doing a pre-registration on OSF, it's very straightforward. There's a number of guides on OSF as well, but it's a matter of creating an account and a new project. And then, there are various ways you can upload. It can just be a Word document, or you can follow the templates which are available on OSF as well. I briefly do want to cover some additional ways that you can you can look at. These are more sensitivity analyses for your particular meta-analyses. So one of the most important decisions for a meta-analysis is thinking about what studies you are going to include. If you are publishing a meta-analysis, it's nice to demonstrate that, hey, regardless of my decisions, the results are quite similar. Or in other words, one study or a set of studies aren't biasing my entire meta-analysis. We've seen a lot of examples of, particularly on Twitter, somebody will go, look, someone's posted a meta-analysis with an effect size of D = 4, and that's completely biased the meta-analysis. Researchers are often interested in seeing whether particular studies or groups of studies are biasing meta-analysis. And this thing's called a GOSH plot. It's a graphical display of study heterogeneity. And essentially what it does is it runs all possible combinations of meta-analyses. So say if you have 10 studies, it'll go study 1 and study 2, study 1, study 2, study 3, and go through all the possible combinations. Once you start hitting about 20 or 30 studies, the numbers start ballooning quite a lot. So when you're running this analysis, there is a way that you can randomly select, like I've done within this code here. So I think this was like 20 studies, and that ends up being over 65,000 combinations. But if you want to do it a little bit more quicker and save your processor, you can randomly select a number of studies, but you're going to get roughly the same result. So what this demonstrates is these are the range of effect sizes and their respective heterogeneity for different combinations of studies that you're including in your meta-analysis. So it's a good little visualization here. And this would kind of show, yeah, you know, this is kind of the thing that you would expect. You get you know, the more studies you have, the more heterogeneity you have. That's not a surprise. And look, this is a typical of a type of plot where there's quite a lot of study homogeneity and not too much difference regardless on the decisions that you make. Okay, so what happens when you actually make this GOSH plot? And here I've simulated some two big outliers that I've simulated here for this particular meta-analysis. And these come out when you run your GOSH plot again and you've simulated these two things. It's very clear that there is one or more studies when you actually include those particular studies in the whole possible universe of meta-analyses you can do based on the studies that you included, that really pop out. So these effect sizes, which in this case was Fisher's Z correlation coefficient, there's a bunch of studies which not only had high heterogeneity, but they also had larger effect sizes. And there are ways that you can specifically drill into what particular studies there were. So here you can visualize, and you can say, I want to visualize study 12, and you can look and you can see almost all the possible meta-analyses that you can do with study 12 tend to bias what results that you find. So if this is a real meta-analysis, then what I would do is I would actually present and do what's more traditionally called a leave one out analysis, and demonstrating even if we leave out study 12, which seems to be an outlier, we still have the same sort of conclusions, and the effect sizes haven't changed too much, or maybe they have changed, but you do have to demonstrate that. But this is a really nice way of looking at the sensitivity of one or a group of different meta-analyses. That is an approach for including different sets of studies. But if you want to get more specific, you can look at what's called a multiverse meta-analysis. Multiverse analysis is another thing which is commonly done within primary research, but now this is being developed for meta-analysis. So here, this runs an entire universe of plausible analyses that you can do based on certain inclusion and exclusion criteria. So here you would say, well, are we only going to include studies that report males, or only going to report females? What sort of measures are we going to use? What about age? And you can go through and you can think about what are all the defensible different ways that you can run this meta-analysis, and you can run all these studies, and you can actually see how these effects change. So in this particular example, most of these studies are non-significant, but a few are. So say this data was public and people posted a result going, hey, there's a result here, yet you were to reanalyze this and actually see, well, if you were to do all possible combinations, only one of these studies, only 1% would be significant, then that suggests that there was a higher probability that there was a little bit of analytical flexibility going on here. So this is another cool approach. And yeah, you can follow the link. I'm going to post a link to these slides as well if you're interested. But yeah, you can do multiverse meta-analysis, which is really nice, and something that I'm working on doing for my next meta-analysis, just because I think it's a really cool demonstration of what you can do. And I love seeing all these things which are commonly used in primary research moving across to meta-analysis too. And yeah, you've got more traditional measures of influence diagnostics. Unfortunately, there is no gold standard, much like primary research. There is no gold standard as to what constitutes an outlier. Yet here are a few diagnostics that you can use. And if there is specific criteria for what for each of these measures for what would constitute an outlier, but we can see the visualization here, and this is from the Metafor package. And if one of those studies were considered to be influential or an outlier, on the bottom right plot, one of those dots would be red. But yeah, this is another thing within the Metafor package that you can do. Another thing is power analysis. So you can specifically look at the statistical power on the studies that were included in your meta-analysis. So all things equal, I would trust a meta-analysis which included studies which were appropriately powered, say 80% or 90% or what have you. But there is a way using the Metavis package where you can visualize this, and you can actually say, okay, based on my studies, here is the power of the studies that were included. Really, really nice to look at the evidential value of the studies that were included in a meta-analysis. And I like this approach so much. I wrote my own R package. This was fun. This is a great experience. And now I have the utmost respect for people who are writing proper R packages, because it's a lot of work, but it was a fun learning experience. Where what I did was, this is a way of visualizing for either an individual meta-analysis or a set of meta-analysis, the statistical power, assuming a range of effect sizes. On the left, you can see the observed power. So that's assuming the summary effect size is the true effect size, which is probably not the case because things are inflated. But for a range of plausible effect sizes from 0.1 to 1, you can actually see what the statistical power is for each study in meta-analysis. So it calculates that and looks at the median, and you can say for this given meta-analysis, the median power is this given a range of effect sizes. So this is a nice little thing, and it's really cool. People are starting to use this like package, which is a bit of a surprise, but it's very nice, and it's something that we're beginning to implement in the meta-analyses that we're doing in our lab as well, just so we can check the evidential value of the studies that we are including in our meta-analysis. So yes, before I finish, I do want to give a shout out for some resources for learning more about meta-analysis. There's a fantastic free book. This is really, really cool. Online, doing meta-analysis in R, really, really nice. I would highly recommend it. If you have questions that you can't find from having a Google around, the R meta-analysis mailing list is fantastic. There's a number of active people, including Wolfgang, who is the author of the Metaphor package, who responds to everything. He does fantastic. And there's a few other people as well who are very knowledgeable and respond to all manner of questions. And then the final resource is where I learned a lot about meta-analysis, and that's Twitter. Twitter is a place where I've all these new packages, all these new approaches, I've learned a ton. And if Twitter is something you want to get into more as an academic, I wrote a free book. I'm plugging it, not because I'm making any money. I'm plugging it because I think it can be really useful for you and your academic career. This is a free book, tforscientist.com, on how to use Twitter, because for me, Twitter is a fantastic resource for learning more about research methods. So let's have a chat about this. Thanks for listening. If you want to keep staying connected, here's a few details, or if you have any questions, you can send me an email as well. So thanks for your attention, and let's talk some meta-analysis.